you'll need to approve the recording. And I will share the recording with you all later today. And then also, same thing with second class, I'll share the recording with you as well. So I am Kathy Adams Clark, and thank you all very much for joining me today. I hope you all have a good time. Everybody's got your handout, correct? Yeah.
Yep.
Everybody got your handout? Okay. And then everybody has sort of gotten all your settings done?
Think so.
Yes. Okay,
Yes.
good. That's because it's really important that we get the cameras somewhat uniform today, because we have Nikon, Canon, Sony, and Olympus in this class. And so each one of you has got a totally different camera. Nobody's got the same camera in here. So it's really important that you all know how to use your individual camera, not just a theoretical camera, but your individual camera. So that's what's important for me. What I'm going to do today is I am going to teach you all how to use your camera in the manual mode. And this is going to be a bit challenging for you. Some of you might find this just super, super easy and it'll just totally click. And others of you, you might grapple with it a little bit and fight with it a little bit. Do not get discouraged. Nobody has ever died from having to learn how to use a camera in the manual mode. I equate the manual mode to learning how to bake a cake from scratch. So if you learn how to bake a cake from scratch, then when it doesn't go right, you have an understanding of what's going on. If all you ever do is pour the powder out of the box and pour the liquids on the other side and mix it up and put it in the oven, you've never really learned how to bake a cake. So this is a lot like baking. I'm going to teach you the manual method of photography. That way you're going to know light meter, f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO. And if you look at your handout, you will see that what I'm going to teach you today is light meter, f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO. Photography is not creative. Photography is technical. And if you learn the technicals, then you can add your creativity to it, and then you can create beautiful images. But if you don't know the technicals, you're always going to grapple with why this picture didn't work. And as a result, you're never going to get that full creativity that you're looking for. So this is going to be a little bit harder than some people might make it. But this is the way I've been teaching for 27 years. And everybody always comes back to me and says, I'm so glad you made me learn f-stop and shutter speed, because believe it or not, once you learn f-stop and shutter speed, you'll never forget it. It just becomes routine. So if you don't know light meter, f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO, then this blue and green macaw is not, or blue and red macaw is not going to stop so that you can get your act together and get your picture. The lioness is not going to stop so that you can figure out what light meter you should use or where your focus point should be. You have to just instinctually know this stuff. The same thing if you see something like tall-masted sailing ship going through the Venice Harbor, you cannot stop and ask this to stop so that you can get your act together with your camera. You have to just be able to move. Milky Way, it stays there for a long time, but if you don't know how to do it, then you're not going to get the photo that you're looking for. Or something as cute as the kids across the table from you. If you don't know whether the most important button is your light meter or your shutter speed or your f-stop or your ISO, then you're not going to get the photo from them. So I want you to learn all of these components so that then when you want to do something creative, or then when you want to do something more challenging like the solar eclipse next year, for instance, then you've got all the tools that you need to get that photograph. Same thing with the aurora borealis. If you know the components, then this is a piece of cake to photograph. So you've got to learn those components. And even something as weird and crazy as photographing through a crystal ball. Anybody have a crystal ball? Yeah. Linda, you've got one. If you don't know how to photograph through a crystal ball, or if you want to learn, I've got a class tomorrow night, and you can still, get in it with the skills that you all are going to have by tomorrow night. So the view through a crystal ball is amazing. It brings smiles to everybody's faces. Or even if what you want to do is just as simple as photograph your own cat against the light, you've got to know light meter, f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO. Because once you learn those 4 components, then you can photograph anything you want, and you're in control of it, and you know how to do it. And so that's what I want you all to learn how to do. Okay, so on your cameras, almost every one of you all has a flip out screen of some sort. We do not use the flip out screen off to the side. Drives me crazy, but we do not put that screen off to the side. That screen is flipped back and put against the camera with the information side facing out. There are times, like when the camera's on the ground, that this flip out screen becomes really handy, or the camera's overhead, this flip out screen becomes very handy. But we don't use the flip out screen on a daily basis flipped out. We use it pushed back against the camera. And then up against the edge of the viewfinder is a diopter. Did everybody find your diopter?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Some cameras put it on the left, some cameras put it on the right, some manufacturers put it at the bottom of the left, some at the top of the left, some at the top of the right, some at the bottom of the right. The diopter is to adjust the view through the viewfinder for your eye prescription. So when you look through the viewfinder, you push the button halfway down, all the lights come on inside the viewfinder, and then you adjust that little dial for your eye prescription. So if you hand your camera to somebody else, they are not going to get a clear view through that viewfinder. Students in the past have told me, I hate the viewfinder. The viewfinder, it's just ugly. I'd rather look on the back. Well, that's because they haven't adjusted the viewfinder for their eye prescription. So once you adjust the viewfinder for your eye prescription with your diopter, then the view through it is just, it's amazing. So we want to look through the viewfinder because that's where we're going to get the clearest view. So everybody found your diopter? Everybody knows where that is? Good. Okay, super. Okay. So starting off with some of the basic operations in your individual camera, just to make sure everybody knows what I'm talking about. The D500, that's Vicky's camera, right?
That's right.
That's Vicky's. Okay. So Vicky, on your camera, you have a lot of controls along the outside of the camera. You have a lot of controls along the top of your camera. And then you also have one dial in the back and one dial in the front. You have the big dials, one dial in the front and one dial in the back. You have the INFO buttons right here for pulling up the display panel, the display screen on the back of your camera. And then you use one dial in the front for your f-stop or your shutter speed, and one dial in the back for your f-stop or your shutter speed. So when you're changing your f-stop or your shutter speed, you're using one of these 2 dials. And then the 3500, that's Jackie, right?
All right.
Yeah. So Jackie, you've got the 3500, and your camera once again has some dials on the top. And then on the back of it, you pull up your display screen with this I button right here. And when you pull up that display screen with your I button, then you can make all of your changes down here underneath it. Did you find that already?
I did.
Good, super. And then you've got, let me go back. You've got your no dial in the front, only one dial in the back. So you're a 1 dial camera when I get to that one, okay? Good. And then also it's that I button for pulling up your information for your Nikons. And then the Canons, the Rebel 7. So this is Phyllis. Phyllis didn't make it with me today, but I'm going to go ahead and just talk about it anyway. So those of you all using the Canons, by the way, we want to be on this standard screen on the back. So it's under your display levels and settings, and it's the standard screen on the back for you Canon users. And then the Rebel 7. So Phyllis is once again not with us on this one. So she's got ISO on the top. And then the R6. Linda, I couldn't remember if you had R5 or R6. So I threw the R6 in. Okay.
I have the 5, but that's
You've got the
fine.
5. They've got the same body. So we're okay on that one. And so yours also on your back display panel, you push your info button to pull up this screen on the back, and you do the info button 3 or 4 times. I'm sure you figured that one out already.
Yeah.
And then you push your Q button, standard in Canons, to allow you to move around. And then you also have 2 dials. You have 1 dial in the front and 1 dial in the back. Excuse me, one dial in the front and the big dial on the back. Okay. So your big dial is going to change your f-stop. That's the big dial icon right there. And your front dial is going to change your shutter speed. Okay. And then the RP, Eve, you've got the RP?
Yes.
Yeah. So you've got the RP on yours. And so yours is just a bit smaller camera than the R is. And you've got your Q button once again to allow you to move around to your different panels on the back. Push your info button 3 times, and that brings up your display screen on the back. And then you have your front dial right here. And then you also have your back dial right there. Correct, Eve?
Correct.
Good, good, good. Front dial changes shutter speed and back dial changes f-stop. Right? Okay,
Yes.
good, super. Okay, very good. And then we have got the, let me see. There are we, which one was this one? Oh, the 5D. So Apruva, you've got this one, right? Okay. And you'll notice that you have a lot of buttons on the top of your camera that you can change things rapidly on. You also have a front dial that changes your f-stop, excuse me, changes your shutter speed.
Shutter speed, yes.
Yes. And then your back dial, your big back dial changes your f-stop.
Yes.
And then you're pushing your Q button as well. And your Q button as well brings up this screen right here. Press your Q button, move around, and you've got this little joystick right here to move around your back display panel. You also have the ring that'll move you around your display panel, and the front dial will also move you through your display panel. And then when you get to what you want, you press the set button, change what you want, and then move on from there. Correct?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Super. And then the Sony, Sarah, this one's yours, right?
Yes.
Good. So your Sony, your your A7R2, then you've got your display panel on the back. Does it look something like this, Sarah?
It can. I don't, because you can cycle through the display and change it.
You can change it. Exactly.
Yeah.
So as you've got it, so you've got one display that kind of looks like this one right down here.
Right.
Good. And then when I'm talking about your light meter scale, you can see your light meter scale right here. And then you can also see your light meter scale right down here. It's this negative 1.7, I'm sorry. So when
Okay.
I'm talking about your light meter scale for everybody else, you're going to look at a positive and negative number instead.
Okay.
Okay. Depending on how you've got it set. And then with your A7R, your shutter speed's on the front dial and your f-stop's on the back dial, correct?
Correct.
Good, super. Okay. And then the Olympus, so this is Renee's, yeah?
Yeah.
So Renee, you've got the Olympus and your shutter speed is on your back dial right here.
Yeah.
And your f-stop's on your front dial, correct?
Yes.
And then your display panel looks a bit like this.
Mhm.
And then you have got a light meter scale right down here, but you also see this positive and negative number right here.
Yep.
So yours is going to be like Sarah's camera, and that you've got, depending on your setting, you've got a decimal number, positive, negative, and then you've also got a light meter scale.
Yep. I see that.
Correct?
Yep. That's correct.
Hey, very good. Okay, there you go. And then here's the top of your camera. On your Olympus. Okay, good. Okay, so everybody turn your camera on, and everybody has your f-stop at 5.6. correct?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, good, good. Why 5.6? There's nothing magic about it. It's simply that every camera gets a 5.6. Every lens gets a 5.6. So that's why we're on 5.6. And if you turn your camera on, look through the viewfinder. So turn the camera on, look through the viewfinder. You should see your light meter scale in the bottom of the viewfinder. And for most of you, the Canons and the Nikons, it will be a scale like you're seeing right here. And then Sarah, you've got your positive and negative number. And then Renee, you've got your scale plus a positive and negative number,
Yeah.
correct?
That's correct.
Correct, good. Okay, everybody see this scale? Okay, so this scale is called your light meter scale. You put it in the middle, and I'll show you how to do that in just a little bit. You put it in the middle, and the camera will give you a perfectly exposed image. If it's on the negative side, it's going to be dark, and if it's on the positive side, your picture's going to be light. You can also see it on your display panel on the back, so you can just look at it on the back for right now for class. But when you're taking the picture, you need to be paying attention to that light meter scale. Now, put your camera down for just a moment and let me explain to you what your light meter is. So your light meter is inside the camera and it is reading the light as the light goes through the lens and then before it hits the sensor. So it's reading that light that's coming through the lens. That light meter in the 1950s used to be a handheld device. My father used to hand hold it out in front of him. And I inherited it, and it's with his slide rule. So they both serve an equally useful purpose today because we've replaced them. So in the 50s, the engineers put the light meter inside the camera body. So we no longer needed to use that handheld light meter anymore. So that light meter is reading the light, and then it's saying, okay, you need to make some changes because this picture is going to be dark or light, depending on where my light meter scale is. And you change that with your f-stop and shutter speed, which I'll teach you in a minute. But I now need to go under the hood for just a moment. And I need to teach you about your 3 different light meters, because depending on what light meter you use, your picture will come out totally different because you're told the camera, use this light meter instead of that light meter. So let me tell you your 3 types of light meters so you know which one to use. So that's your light meter scale. And by the way, your icons are like this. So on most of your cameras, it is going to be a rectangle with a segmented somehow. Canon makes it like this one. Multi is like this one on your Sonys. And then Nikon makes it a rectangle with 5 little sections to it. So this is called your evaluative or your multi, and I'll explain that in just a second, but that's your icon on the back of the camera. So we point the camera at the scene and we envision in my mind that I'm going to get a silhouette of the shrimp boat. If I point my camera at the scene and I set my light meter, I push my Q button or my I button or my FN button, and I move to that little icon and I change it. And I set it to what's called center weighted light meter. What the light meter is going to do is read all of the light in the frame and then average and put weight on what's in the center of it, center weighted light meter. The center weighted light meter just takes all the light in the entire frame and mushes it all together. It just takes that bright sun and that dark shadow and puts it together. But what happens if you take white paint and mix it with black paint? What do you get?
Gray.
Exactly.
Gray.
And that's pretty much what a center weighted light meter does. It just kind of mushes all the colors together. And as a result, if we put it in the middle, we get a photo that's not as dramatic because it's just taking all of the colors and mixing them all together. Center weighted light meter is also the most primitive of the light meters. And this is the light meter we do not use. because most of the camera manufacturers have not put a lot of technology in the center weighted light meter. So on your handout, you can just put a line through your center weighted light meter, because this is the one that we don't use. So it just takes everything and mixes it all together. In the late 1970s, early 1980s, the engineers came out with a brand new type of light meter. And this was called Spot by Nikon. Canon had to call it evaluative because they got apparently to the patent office second. So they had to call it evaluative. And then everybody else after Canon and Nikon, so your Olympus and your Sony, also calls this Spot. And what the Spot meter does is it only reads the light in this section of the frame. It ignores the sun, it ignores the shade, and it only reads this light, this area of the frame right here. So the Spot meter, when it came out in the late 1970s, early 1980s, really created a revolution for photographers, because we could now photograph something against a very dark background or a very light background, and we didn't have to worry about the background color anymore. So we could photograph a performer in a spotlight against a very black stage. And the performer in the spotlight, as long as we put that circle on them and dialed in our f-stop and dialed in our shutter speed to put our light meter in the middle, that performer would be perfectly exposed, but the stage would be totally black like it looked to our eyes.
Mm.
Me, as a nature photographer, I could photograph a hawk on a branch against a brilliant blue sky. Brilliant blue skies kiss of death in photography. It's too bright. And then by putting this hawk in the circle and dialing in my f-stop and dialing in my shutter speed, now the hawk would come out perfectly exposed. If I did it with the center weighted light meter, the old fashioned center weighted light meter, more of the sky would be in the equation. And as a result, I would get a silhouette of a hawk. So this allowed me to now only isolate one area of the frame. I worked my way through college as a baby photographer at Kmart and Walmart. Some of you all might remember baby photographers at Kmart and Walmart with the $9.99,
Oh, yeah.
$9.95 package. If you don't, then you have pictures of yourself from Kmart and Walmart. In the late 1970s, early 1980s, we started photographing kids against solid black backgrounds, and we started photographing kids against solid white backgrounds. How'd we do it? We put the spot meter on the kid's face. The camera gave us a proper exposure on the kid's face, and no matter what color the kid was, the kid's face came out perfectly exposed, and the background was either dark or light, depending on what background I'd pulled down. So this spot meter is really useful, except we don't photograph really, really bright subjects against really dark objects, or really, really light objects against a dark background very much. So this spot or partial light meter is available for our use probably 1% of the time. So on your handout, just make a note that you're going to use it about 1% of the time. So only if you are looking at a subject that's bright, but it's up against a really dark background, or only if you're looking at a subject that's dark against a very bright background, would you push the button and rotate the dial and move into spot. So you're not going to use this very often, but it does come in handy when we need it. It's a tool we can use when we need it. The light meter that we're going to use most, and the light meter that I've got you all set on right now, came about in the 1990s. And this is where the camera manufacturers all the way up to 2022 have put all of their technology into this light meter. And what this light meter does is it reads this segment and averages all the light. It reads this segment and averages all the light. It reads this segment and averages all the light. It reads this segment and averages all the light. And then it reads this segment and averages all the light. So that what we end up getting are various segments of the frame that are being read, and then the camera is making adjustments in between. all of you all are working with newer cameras. And so we're reading now, the cameras now are reading up to 64 segments, not just 5 segments. And the cameras also know that there's a really bright segment up there and a really dark segment down there. So the cameras now make adjustments through all of those light meter readings. So this is where we want to leave our camera set almost 99% of the time. So this is your evaluative light meter if you are a Canon user. This is your matrix light meter if you are a Nikon user. This is a multi light meter, I think, for the Sony, and it's a segmented for the Olympus, but I might have those two reversed. So this is the light meter that we want to use most of the time. So to give you an example of why we would use this light meter, here's the shot that I took, and this is with the evaluative light meter. And then I did one more little thing, but I won't tell you what that is because it doesn't make any sense right now. So this is what I got, silhouette of a shrimp boat. But if I had used my spot meter, push my info or my Q button or my function button, change to my spot meter, this is what my photo would have looked like.
Oh, wow.
Because this is what I saw with my eye. And by putting the light meter right here on the side of the shrimp boat, I'm telling the camera properly expose that part of the shrimp boat. So that's what the brain has told the camera. And you got to remember that we are smarter than these cameras. We have to give them proper instructions. So the difference between the two photographs, and you see the sun's gone down, that's just because it's not the sunset that I want. It's not the great picture that I want, is one light meter here and one light meter here. So the spot meter is only reading a small spot of your frame. The evaluative multi-matrix segmented light meter is reading all of your frame in various segments and then doing complex algorithms to get you closer to the better exposure. The more that I use the Canon mirrorless cameras, the latest cameras that are coming out, and those of you that are in the same boat as me, that you're using the latest iteration of our camera manufacturers' cameras, I am using less and less spot and more evaluative matrix segmented multi, because this is just where all the technology is going. So when you look at your camera, on the back of your camera, when you pick your camera up, then make sure that you know what that icon is, and make sure that you have that light meter set in case you accidentally misset it last time you were there, but make sure you've got it set, because this is the underlying root of how you make your photographs. Just like I was talking about baking just a little bit ago. So instead of cake flour, if I used self-rising flour, those of you all who know about baking, my cake would come out totally different if I used cake flour versus self-rising flour, right? But that's one of those things under the hood that if you don't know that, you're going to find out that there's some problems. So make sure that you've got your multi-evaluative matrix or segmented light meter set. But when you see something like this barn owl against this really dark background, this is a really light subject against a very dark background. And this barn owl was in the sun, but his roosting spot is dark in the background. That's going to be a super contrasty photograph to try to take. So this might be a good chance for you to know, okay, let's push that meter and go to the spot or the partial, as Canon calls it, instead of staying where we are. So just kind of train your eye to look at the scene and decide whether we need to change the light meters. Everybody have that one?
Mhm.
Okay, now we got to put that scale right in the middle. So to put that scale right in the middle, we are going to use our f-stop and our shutter speed. So let me teach you f-stop first, and then we will go on to shutter speed, and then I will give you an hands-on to try to balance your light meter. Okay, so you look at this photograph, and you see that we've got the malachite butterfly. It's on a branch, it's on a little leaf, it's got a little bleeding heart flower next to it. And you notice how that's all sharp. The eye of humans always goes to the sharp point of the photograph first. So whatever is in focus, that is what we look at first. We ignore what is out of focus. So knowing that the human eye ignores what's out of focus, we blur out areas of the frame that are not important. So what's behind the butterfly? What is that?
Stem?
Sand? Yeah. What's back there?
Sky.
Sky. Okay. Brown sky. It's a hazy sky. Yeah.
Well, in Ohio, it's brown sky.
Yeah, that's right. It's one of those Sahara dust Houston days, right? It's not important what's in the background, because what's in the background isn't important to the story that I'm trying to tell. It isn't important to what I'm trying to illustrate. It's gravel from a parking lot. And if I let you see that gravel, and you had recently spent the weekend shopping for gravel, then you would go back there and start looking at that gravel, and you'd start talking, your brain would go back and look at gravel. I don't want you to look at the gravel. I don't want you to look at whatever's in that background. I want you to look at the butterfly. So by being able to blur out certain aspects of the photograph is what we can do with our f-stop. So it controls what we let our viewer see, and it controls what we let our viewer not see. It leads our viewer's eye to what is in sharp focus and what we want them to see, and it distracts them from what we don't want them to see. So your f-stop allows you to control what's in focus in your photograph and what's not in focus. We are designing our photograph. So what I'd like you to do is take your paper that you're writing on, flip it over if you would, please. Or your handout if you would like. Turn it turn it horizontal to the horizon, turn it horizontal. And then I want you to draw this diagram, but I want you to give yourself plenty of room underneath to write and plenty of room over on the side to write. So give yourself a horizontal line, and under that horizontal line, write 2.8, 3.5, 4.5, 5.6, 6.8, 8, 11, 16, 22, and 32. And then on the vertical line, write 500, 250, 125, 60, 30, 15, 8, 4, 0.3 with quotation marks, 2 with quotation marks, and then the word bulb. Okay, why you've done this is this 2.8, 3.5, 4.5, 5.6, 6.8, 8, 11, 16, 22, and 32. These are called f-stops. F with a slash, and then the word stop next to it, f-stops. So your f-stops are these decimal numbers and whole numbers. F-stops are the numbers you and I talk about. Kathy, what f-stop should I use? 5.6. Vicki, what f-stop did you use on that photograph? F16. Eva, what f-stop do you think you're going to use? F32. So the f-stops are the numbers that you and I talk about. When you download your photographs to your computer, your f-stop that you use is embedded in the photograph. So when you send the picture to me, or you want to go look at it 12 years from now, you can look at your photo and you can say, I used an F8. So your f-stops are the numbers that we see through the viewfinder on the back display panel. And then also these are the numbers that you and I talk about. So your f-stop is the number that we talk about. You'll notice that it's f/stop. F from the function symbol in math, slash division, and then the word stop. It's a mathematical formula, but luckily you never, ever, ever have to know the mathematical formula unless you want to take my deep dive into depth of field class, and then you can know the mathematical formula, but we never have to do it. We never have to know anything about it. So it's a math formula is what it is. But what's happening inside the lens on your camera, not the body, the lens, is we have this thing called an aperture. And that aperture is really, really wide open at 2.8. So draw yourself a real big circle at under 2.8. It's a real big opening under 2.8. And when you click and move to 3.5, the opening gets a little smaller. And when you move to 4.5, the opening gets smaller, and 5.6, it gets smaller, and 6.8, it gets smaller, and 8, it gets smaller, and 11, it gets smaller, 16, it gets smaller, 22, it crunches way down, and 32, it's just as big as a pinprick. So the light coming through the lens starts out with a big aperture, so a lot of light comes through. And as you move through the scale, that aperture closes down and closes down and closes down to where very little light is coming through. And that's in your lens, not in your camera, in your lens. And then physically, what's happening is this thing called depth of field, DEPTH of field, depth of field. And when you're at 2.8 and there's a really, really big opening in that lens, in that aperture of that lens, and then that light goes all the way through all of the 9 convex and concave lenses that are inside that lens. When you're at 2.8, a very tiny amount is in focus. So under 2.8, make yourself a little teeny weeny line, because if you use 2.8, only about a 1/16 of an inch is in focus. Everything in front's out of focus and everything behind is out of focus. And if you go to 3.5, you maybe get 2/16 of an inch. So give yourself another little bitty line under 3.5. And when you go to 4.5, maybe you get about an inch in focus, but everything in front of it is out of focus and everything behind it's out of focus. And then when you go to 5.6, where I've got you right now, then you have more area in focus. And as you go to 6.8, you get more area. And as you go to 8, you get even more area. And under F8, draw yourself a big, heavy line. Make that line really, really thick. Because there's an old saying in photography, F8 and be there. And that is just put that camera on F8. Most stuff will be in focus. It won't be super creative, but most stuff will be in focus. Just use F8. So what's program mode do? It puts you on F8. Most stuff's going to be in focus. You're not going to mess up your photograph. Your cell phone camera, by the way, kind of at F8. Most stuff's in focus. It's not going to be real dramatic, not going to get blown out on one end or fuzzy on one end, but you know, most stuff's going to be in focus. So that's what F8 is. It's just kind of most stuff's in focus, not real dramatic, but most stuff's in focus. But then when you go to F11, more stuff is in focus. And 22, more stuff is in, And 22 is more stuff is in focus. And by the time you get to 32, give yourself an infinity symbol under F32. Because when you get to the F32, then everything from the foreground of your lens, when you're looking through the camera, everything from the foreground to the mountains in the background is going to be in focus. So F32 means you've got a lot of depth of field. Now, if you look at this, 2.8 is a little number. It's got a big opening and it's got a little bit in focus. So the way you can remember this, 32 is a big number, tiny opening, a lot of stuff in focus. The way you can remember this is that at 2.8, 2 things are in focus, 32 things are in focus. The bigger the number, the more stuff is in focus. The smaller the number, the less stuff is in focus. Does that make sense? So if you just want a little bit in focus and you want to blur the background out and blur the foreground out, then you would choose a 2.8, a 3.5, or a 4.5. And then if you want to do a landscape, you know, lake, hills, mountains, then you would do 32 or 22. So the bigger the number, the more stuff is in focus. The smaller the number, the less stuff is in focus. Make sense?
Mhm.
Good. So if you're looking at a photo like this, you see that the statue's face is in focus, hands out of focus, wall behind it is out of focus. So what f-stop did I use?
Maybe at 5.6.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody get that one? Why I would use a 5.6 on that one? And then I focus on the face. Now, a butterfly lands on her finger. And now I want to try to get the butterfly and her face in focus. Now I'm not going to be able to blow the wall out, because now to get the butterfly and the face in focus, I'm going to have to go back to like an 8 or an 11, because now I need a lot of stuff in focus. Well, that's going to spill over to the background. And so now probably the background is going to be somewhat in focus as well. You see here, it's out of focus. It's just nice and soft. You all don't really care what that wall is back there. It's just a background. So you have to adjust that f-stop based on how much you want your viewer to see in the photograph and how much you want your viewer not to see in the photograph. So this is a little 2-year-old. And if you notice, her face is in focus, but look closely and you'll see that her earrings are out of focus. So based on that, what f-stop do you think I'm using?
Like a 3.5 or 4.5?
Yeah, about a 3.5 or a 4.5, exactly. This is about an f4 on this one. And so, you know, and you notice also that the background is a long distance away. The further the background is away from your subject, the more you can blow it out of focus. The closer the background is to the subject, the harder it is to blow it out of focus. That's an important thing for you to remember. As photographers, we move around a lot. We jostle around with our subject because we want to try to put our subject as far away from our background as possible if we're trying to make that background soft. What's in the background?
Is it a car, maybe?
Car. What's in the background?
Patio.
Plants.
Plants. Yeah. Yeah. Now, I don't want you to see those plants, because if you're not interested in the little girl, you're going to go back and shop for plants behind her. So the more stuff I can show you that distracts you, the more things you're going to look at in a photograph. And so that's our designing of the photograph. So just trying to get on eye level with the little girl, so you're looking straight into her eyes, position myself slightly off to the side so that one pot isn't closer to her, it's a little further away. So we're positioning ourselves so that we can get the best angle for our photograph. So your f-stop controls how much we see in the photograph or let our viewer see, and how much we don't let our viewer see. F5.6, once again, you all see she's on a swing. You know she's on a swing. It's not important that she's on a swing. It's not a commercial for a swing. What we want to see 20 years later, she's 21 today, by the way. But you know, what we want to see 20 years later is we want to see that kid. We want to see that face. So we don't want to be distracted by the background. We don't want to get pulled away by the background. We want to just see that subject. So we're designing our photograph through choosing our f-stops. You can use an f4, or you can use an f22, or you can use an f4, or you can use an f22. You see how they're different photographs, f22, f4.
Yeah.
How are you designing your photographs? Because they're different. f4.5 through the crystal ball, or f22 through the crystal ball? Do you want your viewer to see more in the background or less in the background? So what f-stop you choose determines how much we let the viewer see and how much we let the viewer not see in our photographs. We are designing our photograph. So your f-stops allow you to show a lot of depth of field or very little depth of field, depending on how you're working. So camera in your hand, please, because your f-stop depends on your lens. Shutter speed is in your camera, but f-stop depends on your lens. So I'd like you to put your camera in your hand. You can look through your viewfinder if you want to, or you can just look on the back, either one that's good for you. What is the smallest f-stop you can get? And just yell it out when you get there. What's the smallest f-stop you can get?
The Olympus looks like 3.5.
3.5, good.
4.5.
4.5, good.
4.
4, good.
3, I think.
3.5.
3, good. 3.5, good.
2.8,
Which one? Eve?
2.8,
2.8, okay, good.
4.
4, good, 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 good. Now, rotate the dial to the biggest f-stop. What's the biggest f-stop you can get?
22.
22, good.
22.
22, good.
Same
22?
thing.
22.
22, good, 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 good. Now, zoom your lens. When you zoom your lens, can you get a bigger number than 22?
Nope. Olympus,
No.
no.
You still have to rotate the dial.
Yeah, no, still
Yeah.
at 22.
Still at 22.
yeah,
Linda, what's your bigger number now?
a 22 still.
22 still.
Mine 22 too.
22?
Yeah,
No.
22.
Nobody gets a 32 or a 45 when they zoom their lens?
Nope.
No?
No, not on this one.
Interesting. Okay, now go back to your smaller number again.
Oh, wait, I just got 36. when I
Yeah,
zoomed it.
exactly. Exactly. You should have
Oh, now
gotten
I'm up to-
36 when you
Yeah, I
zoomed
got
it.
40.
Okay, and then you got 40 when you zoomed. Yeah, yeah. Some of your lenses will, some of your lenses won't. Now go back to your small number again. And zoom your lens all the way out. And what's the smallest number you can get now?
I'm still at 2.8.
You're still at 2.8, okay?
Yeah,
That's
I wonder if I
four.
got some.
Still at 4.
Still at
I'm
4.
at 6.3.
Now it's 6.3 on that one, right?
I'm at 4.
You're at 4?
4.
4, okay.
Olympus.
5.6.
5.6 when you zoom.
Mhm.
Eva, when you zoom, what do you get?
4.
4. And when you zoom back, what do you get? Is it 4 also? So when you zoom back, what do you get?
4. 4.
4. Okay, good, good. Sarah, when you zoom in and out, what do you get?
It stays at 4.
It stays at 4 no matter
wow.
where you zoom. Okay,
Yeah.
Jackie, does it move in and out or does it change?
So I can start at 3.5 and go up to 5.6.
And go to 5.6. Okay, so these lenses that are changing, Jackie's lens, Vicky's lens, I heard you all on that one. These lenses that are changing are called variable f-stop lenses. And the variable f-stop lens means that if you're zoomed back, you can maybe go to a 3.5. But when you zoom out, you're automatically going to go to a 5.6, whether you like it or not. And then the same thing happens when you're at the high end, the same thing. When you zoom, you get one higher f-stop. When you zoom back, you get another higher f-stop. These are called variable f-stop lenses. These lenses are usually lighter and less expensive than fixed f-stop lenses. So Linda, your lens stayed the same no matter where you zoomed?
Yes,
Yeah, so it stayed, if you zoomed in or zoomed out, it still stayed at 2.8? Did you
Yes.
say? Yeah, Linda, okay.
Yes.
Okay, so a lens that does not change f-stops as you zoom in and out is usually heavier and more expensive. So if you're looking for a lightweight lens, like for backpacking or for travel or something like that, then some people would opt for a variable f-stop lens because it's going to be a little bit less heavy. If it's sometimes it's down to dollars. So you might buy a variable f-stop lens versus a fixed f-stop lens, because a fixed f-stop lens is going to end up costing more. So that's why that's what these lenses are called. And that's why you'll get that variation in your f-stops. Make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. Now, I don't want anybody to put this on right now, but does anybody have like a 50 millimeter lens that's a 1.4 or a 1.2 or a 1.8 or anything like that?
I think so.
It's just a little bitty lens.
35 f2.
35 f2. Okay, good. Now, sometimes we get these fixed lenses that don't zoom in and out, and they have really, really small f-stop numbers on them, which means they have very shallow depth of field. So with Sox Clark here, and by the way, Sox does not like posing for photographs. He's just the only one around sometimes. And so that's why he gets pictures taken of him. I had a 50 millimeter 1.2, meaning that has a very shallow f-stop, which is less than an eighth of an inch, really, really tiny f-stop. I mean, depth of field. It took me roughly 50 pictures of me moving and him moving to get one picture where his little nose is in sharp focus and his little eye is in sharp focus, and they're in the same plane, so they're in sharp focus. Because once you get those really shallow depth of fields, it's very hard to get them in the exact right spot. That's why usually they're studio lenses. So if you have one of these lenses, we may not shoot it at 1.4 or even 1.8 or even 2.8. We'd still photograph at 4, because what this lens is designed for is to give us this beautiful, clear, creamy background. So those lenses are used for a specific purpose. All lenses are made for a specific purpose. It's just like wrenches. You don't go to Home Depot and buy a wrench because it has a purple handle. You go to Home Depot and buy a wrench because it has a purpose and you need it for something. So lenses are the same way. They've got a purpose to them. So your f-stop controls how much we let the viewer see and how much we let the viewer not see. And your lens governs your f-stop. So as long as you have that lens on your camera, that's the range of f-stops you have. So looking at this photograph, what f-stop do you think I used? We can see everything in the frame, all the way from the foreground, moss-covered log, all the way back to the background. What f-stop do you think I used?
22.
32.
You got it, a 22 or a 32, exactly. Okay, we're less than an hour into class and you already know what an f-stop is, and you can look at a photo and guess what f-stop was used. Congratulations, you're moving forward, okay? So I see this river in Costa Rica. I know good and well that what I want to do is an all depth of field photograph of it. So I go down to the edge of the river. I put my tripod legs on the edge of the river. I put my wide angle lens on and I look down the river, and I know good and well I'm going to use my evaluative matrix or segmented or multi-light meter, because, you know, the light's all pretty much the same. You see that whiteness in the river? So it's an optical illusion. You've never seen anything that looks like that really with your eye. So it's the first of our photography optical illusions, the tricks that we play with a camera. So I know that I'm using my evaluative light meter. I know that I'm going to use an f32. So now I've set my camera up. I got my f32 set. I've got my evaluative light meter set. Now I need to balance my light meter. So let's go back to that chart. So I've got my chart, I've got my f32. So I know that I want to use my f32. So now when I look through my viewfinder, put my focus point where I want it to be. I look through my viewfinder, push my shutter button halfway down, my light meter scale comes up and it's out of balance. So now I need to take my shutter speeds, that's over here on the left-hand side. I need to take my shutter dial and I need to rotate my shutter dial until the scale goes right in the middle. And when the scale goes right in the middle, it goes right in the middle at 1/8 of a second. So before this class, you may not have known what F32 and 1/8 of a second would give you. But brain now always has to look at those two numbers and visualize what's going to happen. F32, everything's going to be in focus. 1/8 of a second, shutter speed stops movement or blurs movement. So shutter speed stops movement or blurs movement. 1/8 of a second, if you look on your handout at 1/8 of a second, 1/8 of a second gives you silky waterfalls. 1/8 of a second blurs water. 1/8 of a second always blurs water. So if we set our shutter speed to 1/8 of a second and the camera is stabilized on a tripod, any water in that photograph will blur. So when I look at the two numbers that make my light meter balance, F32, everything's going to be in focus. 1/8 of a second shutter speed. What's going to happen in 1/8 of a second shutter speed? Water's going to blur. I wanted my water to blur because as a photographer, once we learn how to blur our water, we always want to blur our water from now on because only those of us who know how to do it can do it. So once you learn how to blur water, that's it. We blur water from now on. So 1/8 of a second or slower, 1/4 of a second, 1/3 of a second, whatever, it's going to blur water. So I know now with that scale right in the middle, I look at those two numbers and that is exactly what I'm looking for. So 1/8 of a second, F32 for that moment in time. It won't work right now because we don't have the same light as we had at that moment in time. For that moment in time, F32 and 1/8 of a second, put the scale right in the middle. Click the shutter, I get my photograph. Now, somebody told me your max f-stop was 22. Who's got a max f-stop of 22?
I do.
Okay, good. Okay, y'all raised your hands, so that means y'all get to teleport to Costa Rica with me, and you're now standing right there next to me at Costa Rica. So you've got the exact same field of view, hypothetically. We've all on a tripod, we're all lined up, and you say, wait a second, I can only go to F22.
Mhm.
So what's going to happen at F22, because that's more light coming in, is that your shutter speed will balance, your light meter will balance at 1/15 of a second, not 1/8 of a second. And then Renee says, well, wait a second, my water won't blur because I'm not at 1/8 of a second. And I say, right, your water won't blur. And she said, well, the whole reason I came to Costa Rica with you is to blur the water. But your water's not going to blur because you're at 1/15 of a second, not at 1/8 of a second. 15's too fast. Your water's not going to blur. So unless you can go to F32, then you're not going to get the water blur. But if we wait 15 minutes for the sun to go down a little bit more, then what'll happen is those of you that are at F22, you all can probably now go to 1/8 of a second because there's less light in the sky. I will then go to F32 at 1/4 of a second because there's less light in the sky. So there's always a point where you can balance your light meter, but whether the two numbers are going to give you the photo you want is all based on the light we have, either artificial light in the house or man-made light outside. But what's interesting is if we took these two pictures side by side, the light in them would look exactly the same. And if we weren't interested in blurring the water, but we were interested in showing how turbulent the water is, we could go to a faster shutter speed, 1/30th of a second, but then that would make our f-stop 16. And if we went to 60th of a second to show how turbulent the water is, we'd have to move our f-stop to 11. So every time we move one number, we got to move the other number. And if we wanted to show how the rapids were really, really bright or really, really rough in this river, then we could go to 125, but that would put our f-stop at 2.8, or we could go to 250 and that would put us at 6.8, or we could go to 5.6 and that would put us at 500. So there are any number of places that you can balance your light meter, because every one of these is exactly the same amount of light. The more light we have coming through, the faster our shutter speed has to be. The less light we have coming through, the slower our shutter speed has to be. But they're all exactly the same light. 4 plus 0 is 4, 3 plus 1 is 4, 2 plus 2 is 4. They're all the same light, but which one we use is our educated brain and how we're designing our photograph. So your automated modes would choose one. You now are going to choose one because you understand what your f-stops do and what your shutter speeds do, sort of, even though you're tenuously holding on to it. Question? Y'all good?
I've got one quick. All right. So your shutter speed determines the amount of light that you're photograph. I mean, here's your light, your shutter speed, so how much it's going to take into the camera, whether it's going to be a lot or just barely any, or
Shutter
Seven-
speed determines how much movement you're going to stop or how much movement you're going to blur.
gotcha.
But it's also the light, Vicki, because shutter is open longer or open quicker.
Okay.
So you're also dealing with how fast that shutter is moving. How fast the shutter moves determines how much light, how much movement we stop. How long the shutter is open determines how much movement we blur, because the shutter's open, so the subject is blurring while the subject is open. But all of them, the combination of the two is telling us whether the light's right or not, whether the photo is going to be dark or light. Okay.
Makes sense.
But you see how it forms a straight line graph.
Mm-hmm.
So that means we have all different opportunities to balance that light meter. Where we balance it is based on how much we know about what's going on. That's why you have to be educated about what's going on, because what numbers we choose determines how my photograph ultimately looks. So if I want to show the turbulence in the water, then I would use my 1/25 or 250. If I want to blur the water, like I've taught you all, then I would use my 1/8 of a second or slower. If I want to show the turbulence, I would use my 1/25 or 250. But if I want to show the blurring, I use my 1/8 of a second or slower. But you see how the light is exactly the same in each photograph? You see how the light's the same? That's
Mhm.
because I've balanced my light meter in both situations. So no matter where you, when you balance your light meter, the light is going to look right. But the outcome of whether you stop the motion or blur the motion or show a lot of depth of field or don't show a lot of depth of field depends on the numbers that you choose.
Mhm.
Make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So looking at this photograph of Venice, the water is blurred. So roughly what shutter speed am I using?
8.
8.
Good. 1/8 of a second or slower. You all know that now. You can look at a photograph now and see that the water's moving, the water's blurry. And so that means we're using 1/8 of a second or slower. Roughly what f-stop if I'm using, because you can look all the way down the scene and see everything all the way down the scene.
32.
32 or 22. Yay.
22.
Congratulations. You all got it. And you notice that 1/8 of a second that this person right here almost all blurs out. They're a smudge. This person's pretty solid. This person's a little bit more solid, but they're still a smudge. Notice the guy right here with the white bag. He's pretty solid. He's looking in that window. He's not moving too much. But the people going up and down the bridge are a little on the blurred side. See that?
Mhm.
So there's not enough shutter speed to totally stop everybody unless they stay still for that 1/8 of a second or 1/4 of a second. If you want to show the gondolas in the water, then you have to use a faster shutter speed because the gondolas are moving so slowly and not stopping that the gondolas become ghosts. See
Oh,
the guy
wow.
with the bag? He's still there. So if you don't have a fast enough shutter speed, you can't see the gondolas. A slow shutter speed means that the gondolas disappear because the gondolas are moving very slowly at a steady pace. So if you want to see the gondolas, you have to have a fast enough shutter speed to stop the gondolas. So your shutter speed stops motion, didn't stop the guy's foot right there. And the guy with the white bag, I bet you he went in that shop and bought whatever it was that they were looking at because they stayed there a while. So if you want to stop motion in a photograph, your first number you would dial in is your shutter speed. If you don't have to worry about any motion at all, then you can dial in your f-stop first. But if you have motion in the photograph, then you're going to need to dial in your shutter speed first. So I would like you to balance your light meter. Put your f-stop on 5.6, please. Okay, everybody's on 5.6?
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay, good. 5.6. Now what I would like you to do is point your camera at a lamp or a wall, or let's point your camera at a lamp first, a window or a lamp in your room. And now rotate your shutter speed dial, push your button halfway down, rotate your shutter speed dial until your scale goes right in the middle. And when your scale goes right in the middle, and remember, Renee, I think you've got a positive negative number, and Sarah, you do too, instead of a
Well,
scale.
In the viewfinder, I have a scale and a number.
Yay, okay,
If I just look on the back screen, then I just have the positive, negative number.
okay, very good. And then Renee, you have both of them through the viewfinder as well?
Yeah, I have both on screen and in the viewfinder.
Okay, good, 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 good. So everybody's got a scale that we can look at. So
Mhm.
looking through your camera at your lamp or your light in your room or the window in your room, tell me what shutter speed you get and take the picture for me, please. Just yell out what shutter speed you get.
I have a
1/8 of a second.
1/8 of a second, good.
I get 30.
30th, 30?
Yeah,
minus
that's a
good.
little fast. Yeah.
So you're looking out the window.
Yep. I have
Approve,
a big
okay,
window.
gotcha, okay, okay.
I got 1/500th.
1/500th of a second, you looking out the window?
Yeah, I was putting it out the window.
Okay, looking out the window, okay?
Yeah.
Take the picture, okay?
Okay.
Everybody else, what shutter speed did you get?
1/30th.
30th of a second,
Mhm.
good.
Mhm.
110.
10th of a second, good. So that's inside the house, yeah. I got everybody?
1/400?
400th of a second, okay? Is that looking out a window?
No, it's looking out kind of a lamp.
Out of the lamp, you must be
Yeah.
right on the lamp, Vicki, right? Okay, now point your camera down at your floor. So under your desk or down at your floor. And Vicki, you can zoom back if that lens is a little easier to handle that way. So point your camera down at the floor, keep your f-stop at 5.6. Now what shutter speed did you get? And take the picture. What shutter speed did you get? Yell it out.
Let's see.
Yeah, it's telling me I need a flash.
No, don't worry about it. You don't need a flash.
when I
13. I
What,
get
Renee?
13.
14th?
Yeah.
Approve
I
it,
got
do that again.
I got 13.
13, good. 13 with quotation marks?
No.
No, just 13. Okay, good, good, good. Did you take the picture?
Yes.
Okay, good. Everybody else? What shutter
So
speed did you
mine
get?
didn't change.
Yours didn't change,
Mine didn't change
Jackie?
either.
It's still 110.
It's still a 10th of a second?
Mm-hmm.
That's good, but point it at the lamp and what do you get?
It's the same. So I must be doing something wrong.
It's still the same?
Yeah.
Okay, so Jackie, check your camera to make sure that your ISO isn't on auto. You want your ISO to be 200. You're a
Yeah.
Nikon. Is it at
No.
200?
It is.
Do
Mhm.
you see a little auto right above the ISO word?
So I see a flashing ISO A at the top.
At the top, exactly. Jackie, go into the menu of your camera
Mm-hmm.
and go into the camera icon
Okay.
and then scroll over until you see high ISO. And we want to turn that off. We want to turn off auto ISO. This is only in the Nikons, by the way. Nikon set ISO in several different places. This is only for Nikons.
So I'm in the shooting menu.
Yes.
Okay.
Everybody else, keep taking pictures around your room using 5.6. Keep rebalancing your light meter until I get Jackie back on target.
So I see ISO sensitivity.
Yes.
Okay. And sensitivity control.
Uh-huh.
It says on,
And we want to turn it off.
off. Okay.
And now that
All right.
shouldn't, now when you look under your desk, you should get a low shutter speed. And when you look at your lamp, you should get a faster shutter speed. And that little auto should be gone.
Yeah, that A is gone. Yeah.
Yay.
How about that?
Yeah. And then when you point your camera at the lamp, you get a faster shutter speed. Yes. Now,
Mm,
Yes, Jackie?
no,
No?
no.
So are you still getting, you're putting the scale right in the middle, right?
Yeah.
Rotating the
Well-
dial and rotating the shutter dial until the scale goes right in the middle. Don't move the zoom on the camera, on the lens.
Okay.
You're just rotating the dial on your camera body.
Okay.
And that should be changing your shutter speed.
Oh, there we go. Yeah,
You got it?
I
Yep.
got it.
Yeah.
Vicky, you got it too?
Okay. Mhm.
Okay, good. Okay. Everybody good?
I think so.
Yes.
Okay, so now if you're looking at something that's dark, you're getting a slow shutter speed. And if you're looking at something that's light, you're getting a fast shutter speed. And you have to
Yes.
rebalance your light meter no matter what goes on, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes,
Mhm.
okay, good. What that auto ISO was doing was it was preventing her from changing her, she could change f-stops and shutter speeds all she wanted, but that was preventing her from not balancing her light meter by just fluctuating the ISO. So that's what was going on with that. We don't want to leave our auto ISO on very often. Okay,
Okay.
good. Now, when you look at those pictures on the back of the camera, pull your picture up on the back of your camera, you will notice that they don't look really, really good. But you
Sure.
have balanced your light meter. So you've taken some rotten looking photographs, but congratulations, pat yourself on the shoulders. You have balanced your light meter. Okay. So you have done well in that respect. So everybody's good. Everybody's got your f-stops moving. Everybody's got your shutter speeds moving.
Mhm.
Yeah. You're feeling confident. Okay.
Mhm.
Super.
Sure.
Okay. So when we look at a scene now, we're at the middle of the page on your handout. You've got, oh, I forgot. Put your camera back in your hands. So camera back in your hands. And now I want you to rotate your shutter dial, the one that controls your shutter. That's either a front or a back dial, depending on what camera you've got. I want you to rotate your shutter dial. And what is the fastest shutter speed you can get?
Oh, wow.
8,000.
8,000.
8,000, good.
4,000.
4,000, okay.
4,000.
4,000,
8,000.
8,000,
8,000.
8,000. Jackie,
4,000.
4,000. Okay, you see that that you have either an 8,000 or a 4,000. Shutter is in your camera. So when you bought your camera, it has a high and a low, and the shutter speeds you can get are all dictated by your camera body. F-stops in your lens, shutter speeds in your camera body. So 8,000, 4,000, the reality is we won't use 8,000 that much, but we will use 4,000, fairly good significant amount. So 4,000 is a really nice shutter speed to stop birds' wings when they're flying. I photographed a drone flying overhead. So 4,000th of a second would be if we wanted to stop a bicycle moving really, really fast or something like that. Now, rotate your shutter speed dial and tell me the first time you see quotation marks. You can just look on the back if you want. When's the first number that puts quotation marks next to the shutter speed?
3.
3.
Eva?
3.
Eve? 3? Good. Linda?
3.
3.
Oh, wow.
0.3 on Linda and Eve? 0.3
yes.
or, yeah,
0.3.
0, 3.
0. And Vicky, which one?
1.
1, you get, okay. That's the Nikon.
0.4.
0.4, good.
The Olympus is 1.
Is 1 with quotation marks next to it, okay? So the first time that you get to quotation marks and a whole number, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, that means that we're into full seconds, no fractions of seconds anymore. 1/8,000th of a second, really, really fast. 1 quotation marks, that's 1 second. 1 Mississippi, as you used to say when you were a kid, 1 second. Canons give us this 0.3 with quotation marks, but we also have a 3 without quotation marks. A 3 without quotation marks is 1/3 of a second. 0.3 with quotation marks is 1/3 of a second decimal. So the same thing with the Olympus, that we've got a 0.4, that's 1/4 of a second. So we've got 2 numbers on the on the Canons and the Olympus that just move us from whole numbers to decimal to fractions, but we've got a repeating. Whichever one you use, don't worry about them, they're exactly the same. But then you see that you have, do you have 10 with quotation marks next to it? Everybody should have 10 with quotation marks next to it.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, that's 10 seconds. And you do not know how long 10 seconds is until you have to wait because you messed up and you shouldn't have clicked the shutter and you got to sit there and wait 10 seconds. It is a long time. And then you've got 30 with quotation marks.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
30 with quotation marks is 30 seconds. So this is what we use for long exposures, some things at night. The Milky Way, we don't even go 30 seconds on the Milky Way, but this is when we do some nice creative stuff at night. And then you might have the word bulb next. And if you do, that shutter will stay open as long as you keep your shutter finger pushed. And then so you can leave it on for 4 minutes or 5 minutes or something like that. That's real creative photography. Come back and take some more classes and I'll show you when we use those, especially during night times.
And
Renee.
yeah, the Olympus, it goes to 60.
Yes.
Full 60 seconds and then it goes to bulb.
Yes. So it'll go to 60 seconds and then it'll go to bulb. The Olympus and the Sonys had to set themselves apart from Nikons and Canons, especially since Olympus and Sony went into mirrorless before Nikon and Canon did. And so they often have to have something that's just a little different, you know. So each one of our cameras has something that's just a little different on them. Okay, so you see how many shutter speeds you've got? You got a ton of shutter speeds. We only have, you know, a very few f-stops, but we've got a ton of shutter speeds. So on your handout, I have given you 5 shutter speeds that we will use as benchmarks. So at least, you know, if I'm looking at this, Kathy told me to blur water at 1/8 of a second. So that at least puts you in the ballpark. You don't have to hunt around. You at least know that 1/8 of a second or slower blurs water. If you have something that is gently moving, 1/15 of a second is needed to stop it. So I went to photograph this redbud limb during the springtime. I set my tripod up. I wanted to make that background as blurry as I possibly could. So I found branches that were a long way off. I got everything all set up and I'm looking through my viewfinder and the limb is going up and down just a little bit. So now I have to lead with my shutter speed and follow with my f-stop. So I need at least a 1/15 of a second for gentle movement. I need a 1/60th of a second at least anytime I am photographing anything that is living, breathing, blinking eyes, moving head, twitching whiskers, smiling, not jumping up and down, but just looking at us. I need at least a 1/60th of a second. And notice also that the focus point is right up here on his eyes. You see that? If the eye is not in focus, if the eyes are not in focus on a living creature, it drives us crazy as humans. Snake, frog, grandmother, granddaddy, horse, lizard, I don't care what it is. If the eyes aren't in focus on a living creature, we don't like it. We want to be able to see their eyes. So we want the focus point to always be on the eyes. So some of your mirrorless cameras have an eye focus and it immediately goes and finds the eye and focuses on the eyes. Those of you that are not mirrorless, you're using the digital SLR cameras, we have to move the focus point to the eyes. So to move your focus points on your Canon cameras, look on the back of your Canon cameras first, because this is the universal on Canon, at least on the back of your Canon cameras. The topmost right-hand button is a rectangle with a bunch of little dots in it. Topmost right-hand button over on the far right-hand side up at the top. Linda, you see that one?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, you see that one? Okay, and then Apoorva, you see that one? You have Canon, right?
Yeah.
You see that one? So that's where we push and then we can rotate the front dial, the back dial, or the little toggle, and that allows us to move our focus points around. Linda, you've got mirrorless, so yours is automatically, if you set it for eye focus, it'll go to the eyes. But
Okay.
Apoorva, you're gonna have to move yours around. Nikon's, Sony, and Olympus, you all also have an icon so that you can change your focus point and you can move your focus point individually. First of all, before I start this one, Sarah and Renee, does your cameras have eye focus on them?
I believe mine does.
Okay, good. Renee, does yours?
I don't know.
Okay.
That was one of the pieces that I did not find.
Okay, so it may not have it if you can't find it, but Sarah, if you've got yours, then you can just go to eye focus and it'll automatically find it.
Yeah, I get my camera and my husband's camera mixed up. And
Yes, definitely, definitely. And then on the Nikons, what we want to do on the Nikons is we want to, you have a little icon on your back display panel once again, and you can find that icon, push your I button, open it up, and then instead of using 64 focus points, you can use 32 or 9 or 18 or just 1. So on your Nikons, we want to move it to just 1. And then same thing, you're going to use your that little kind of toggle switch on your back to move your focus points around. So that's the theory of how you do it. If you can't find it right now, then let me know with an email later on and I'll send you instructions on it. Okay. So that way we can control it. We want to control where the focus point is. You have to be a control fanatic if you're a photographer. So we want to focus we want to put the focus where we are. I'm testing the R7 right now. And if you read my blog post from yesterday, I let the big box choose the focus point. So I let the camera choose the focus point. It looked like it was in a good spot to me, but I would have done a better job. So that's where we put our individual focus point on the eyes. That individual focus point on the Canons, you all might also have this big square like this one, or this big rectangle like this one, but we want to use this individual one or the eyes. Canon Rebel, it's this button right here. Let me see who else I have in there. I'm sorry, I didn't put the Nikons or the Sonys or the Olympus in there. Okay, so where this becomes really important, the individual focus point, is that this lioness, when we first encountered her had her head down in the ground, on the ground, and I was using a digital SLR camera without animal eye focus on it. The guide told me as soon as she hears the male lion, she's going to raise her head up out of the grass. She's going to look around and she's going to leave. That's all you're going to get. You're just going to get 1 or 2 shots of her. So I put my focus point up at the top of my frame in anticipation of knowing that when she raised her head up, I could move the frame where the focus point was. And then I was ready to photograph her. If I had all of the focus points activated on the camera, even today's mirrorless cameras, there's a good possibility the grass would have caught the focus if they were moving, and the camera would have focused on the grass and not the lion. So that's why we need to control and know how to manipulate that focus. So just in case we get the focus point on the right place. Same thing with this guy in the parade. Focus point on his face. Otherwise, the camera might think I want to focus on his hand. So that's why we don't want to use those large cluster focus points most of the time, because then the camera is focusing where it thinks we want to focus versus where we want to focus. So that's where I'm using that focus point up on his eyes, or if you've got eye focus, then making sure that you've got the eye focus set. The eye focus, by the way, sometimes will go to a button or a round berry, thinking it's an eye. So it's not foolproof. So you've got to control these things. You've got to think about what you're doing. So next, shutter speed, 2/50th of a second. So the man on the horse in the parade, I need a 2/50th of a second to stop him. Focus points on his eyes, on his face. And this, by the way, was processed with a software called Nick. And I have an alternative processing class coming up to teach you how to do things like this, if you'd like to enroll in that one. Focus point, once again, on his face. 2/50th of a second to stop the little guy in the swing. Not a big guy, not a big teenager in a swing, but a little guy in a swing, 2/50th of a second. So to stop the motion, I have to lead with the shutter speed, follow with the f-stop. So balance the light meter first with the shutter speed and then follow with the f-stop. That ability to move the focus points around the frame allows us to be more creative with how we frame a photograph. Everything always in the center of the picture in focus is boring as all get out. The little young photographer who photographed a family wedding a couple of years ago, she kept the focus point in the middle of the frame the entire time. All those pictures, once you start noticing it, were boring as all get out because the bride's face is in the middle of the frame, but the bride's feet are cut off. Okay, so once you start noticing that the focus point never moved from the center of the frame, these were boring photographs. So we want the focus point to be able to move around 2/50th of a second for the blue-gray tanager down in Costa Rica. And then when we start getting faster shutter speeds, we get into the 500th of a second, if not 1,000th of a second, if not 2,000th of a second, if not 4,000th of a second. So to stop the whale's tail, I need a 500th of a second or faster. So in this instance, I needed much more because of the light than my 500th of a second, but I didn't have enough light to give me a faster shutter speed beyond 500th of a second. So 500th of a second is when water forms balls. Remember I told you water blurs at 1/8 of a second, but water, a splash, forms balls at 500th of a second. So since I didn't have a fast enough shutter speed to go into, or enough light to go into 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000 when I was photographing this whale, I waited until he splashed and then slid down very gently. But I photographed while that water was still in the air, and that water then formed the balls, and that made the photograph more dramatic. So if our shutter speed reaches 500th of a second, then water splashes, we can get balls of water in that splash. So that's what your 500th of a second is for. If I can go to 1,000, 2,000, 4,000, or 8,000, it's going to get even more dramatic than that with stopping the motion. Now, I just said I didn't have enough light to get a faster shutter speed. If you ever don't have enough light to get a faster shutter speed, the fourth component comes into play, ISO. First component was light meter, f-stop, shutter speed, and the last one is ISO. So on Jackie's camera, we just got rid of the auto ISO. So you're in charge of the ISO right now. And I don't want you all to change your ISO. I want you to leave it, but I just want to explain to you what ISO is. So ISO is how fast your sensor is recording light. Nikon's, we have set you at 200 ISO. Canon's, we have set you at 100 ISO. Sony, you're at 100 ISO, and Olympus, you're at 100 ISO. When you are at 100 ISO for everybody except Nikon, Nikon's at 200 ISO, that is your best quality photograph, your best color, your best grain, your best clarity, and your best sharpness. So Nikon's engineered their camera to give you the best quality photograph you can get at ISO 200. Everybody else gave you ISO 100. If you raise your ISO above 100 or 200, say to 400, you are able to get a faster shutter speed in the same light, but you're going to gradually decrease the quality of your photograph. If you go to ISO 800, you're able to get a faster shutter speed, but you decrease the quality of your photograph. You go to ISO 1000, same thing, you can get a faster shutter speed, but you degrade the quality of your photograph. So the higher your ISO, the worse your photograph is going to look. The higher your ISO in bad light, overcast, rainy, dreary, snowy, bad light, the worse your ISO is going to look. Inside, the higher we raise our ISO, because we're working in dark situations like you all have already found out when you were photographing your floor, the worse it's going to look. So what I mean by worse it's going to look, here's a photograph I took out in the Sahara Desert. We were waiting for the sun to go down. We are sleeping in these tents. We're going to photograph the Milky Way and the night sky because there's no light pollution out there. Don't feel sorry for me, guys. There's a flush toilet in the tower right there. Okay, so I'm not totally roughing it, okay? So the guys are playing drums and the fire's going and our bellies are full. We've had our dinner. I'm not going to pass up a photography opportunity like that. So I put my camera on the tripod, stabilize the tripod, the camera, and then because I need a fast shutter speed, because the guys are drumming away with their hands, I need to raise my ISO to give me a faster shutter speed. So this is about a 3200 ISO. And you notice everything looks pretty good down here on the fire pit. Everything looks pretty good on all the carpets. There's some blurring on the hands, but otherwise everything looks pretty good. But if I blow it up, this is what's called noise. So I can then run it through noise reduction software because we've got noise reduction software, and I can make it look better. but I can never recover their hands. And it's always going to be soft. But if I want the photo in today's cameras, I can get the photo because I can always raise the ISO. The better your camera is, the more you paid for it, the more recent you purchased it, the better your high ISO is going to be, because every single iteration of cameras is giving us better and better high ISO. So this photograph of the Jaguar was photographed with Canon's leading camera at the time. And I'm not at 3200 like the guys in the desert. We've got good light. We're in the shade, but we've got good light. But I'm maybe at ISO 10,000, if not 15,000, if not 20,000.
Wow.
So this now allows me to get a fast enough shutter speed to stop the movement of the Jaguar as it's walking through the jungle. I'm in a boat with 15 other photographers, and we got a motor on the back, and I got a guy standing in the back of the boat keeping us all stable, and all the photographers are jostling for position trying to get the Jaguar. So there's all kinds of movement going on. But if you blow this picture up, it looks pretty good. And that's because I'm using top of the line equipment. So your tolerance for high ISO is strictly up to you. If I want the photo, I want the photo. And I'm going to raise my ISO all the top if I have to. And then I'm just not going to look at it real close, and I'm not going to blow it up real big. But if I want the photo, I want the photo. So to get a faster shutter speed, if the light doesn't allow us to get that shutter speed, we can always raise the ISO. So my friend in Florence has this cologne shop where we always stop when we do the photo tours in Florence, Tuscany, and Venice. Eons ago, when I first started doing this, we had to take our tripods in there. She got all freaked out. And then I'm telling everybody, don't knock anything over, don't break anything. And now when we go in there, I can simply tell everybody, raise your ISO to get yourself at least a 60th of a second shutter speed and start taking pictures. So this beautiful thing of being able to raise this ISO allows us to get a faster shutter speed under low light situations. The same thing holds true for the little boys at the table. They're over there, they're doing something really cute. I can just put the camera, what I did is I put the camera on the table. I used my back display panel and twisted it so that I could see what was going on. I raised the ISO to give myself at least a 60th of a second shutter speed. And then I put the focus point on the boys, and I photographed without them knowing I was taking the picture. If I would have raised the camera to my face, they would have seen it and they would have stopped doing what they were doing. So if you want the photo and you can't get a fast enough shutter speed, your fallback is your ISO. So then you can raise your ISO. So the lightning in the photograph, am I using a fast shutter speed or a slow shutter speed?
Fast.
Best.
Fast.
Or maybe
Fast or slow?
Slow.
Vicky
I think
says slow.
It's slow.
Okay, we got a fast and we got a slow in here. Okay, so you can either choose one or two. If I used a fast shutter speed, yeah, go ahead, Renee.
I was just going to say, if it's a higher number in a fraction, that would mean it's technically a smaller,
So
right? Am I-
faster shutter speed, exactly. So that would be like 1,000 or 4,000, right? So that, because it's a fraction. Yes, exactly. See how much math we're using in photography? It's crazy, isn't it? If I used a fast shutter speed, then I would only get a little segment of the lightning. But if I used a slow shutter speed, 30 seconds, cameras on tripod, then I get all the lightning as it's moving through the sky, and it's recording the entire time. So for lightning, we would use a slow shutter speed. For the Acrobat, would I use a fast shutter speed or a slow shutter speed?
Fast.
Fast.
Fast. How fast?
Ooh, at like a 4,000.
4,000. Okay. Everybody see why I would use 4,000? Yeah. And once again, if you can't get to 4,000 because of the light, raise your ISO and that'll let you get to 4,000. So I'm using 4,000 here. And if you look around, I'm on an island somewhere. It's bright sky. I've easily got enough light to use 4,000th of a second shutter speed, easily. And then, so I ask, I see what she's doing. I ask her if I can photograph her. She says yes. And then I also moved my camera to the multiple release, and I'll explain this in the next class for you. And then as she jumped and twisted and turned and flipped, I just fired away and I missed her completely because I didn't know what she was going to do. The more you know about your subject, the better photographer you'll be. So I had to eat crow. I didn't tell her because photographers never admit their mistakes. I just said, would you mind doing that again? And she said, oh, sure. So she did it again. And now I had an idea what she was going to do. And I fired and fired and fired and fired and fired, and I got her. So that 4,000th of a second shutter speed is what we would need for an acrobat flying through the air. So shutter speed stops your movement. If we want to be a bit creative, the light's not good in the gymnasium, but if I want to blur the flags a little bit, it's okay. It shows us movement. If I want to blur the dresses on the dancers, it's okay. It shows us movement. So there's nothing wrong with blurring a little bit of movement so that we can show our viewer that there's more movement going on in the scene. So the last thing I will lead you all with is, would you pull one of your pictures up on the back of your camera, please? And then push your info button or your DSP button, DISP button, until you see the histogram. So you pull a picture up on the back of your camera, and then you're pushing your INFO button or your DSP button. Everybody see your histogram? Shake your head up and down, let me know. Everybody
Yep.
got it? Okay, this is important. We use this as a validation of whether or not we captured all the pixels and colors that we wanted to. A histogram, a perfect histogram, starts over on the left side, which is your blackest black pixels, and ends on your right side, which is your whitest white pixels. A histogram is the picture's been converted to black and white, and then all the pixels, every color of pixel has been separated and put into a pile and graphed. Another reason we're using math, another example of using math. So all that this histogram shows me is how many of every single color of pixel I have. How many crayons do I have in the crayon box? If the histogram goes all the way across, then I have all the colors I need to play with. If the histogram does not go all the way to the left, then I don't have all the blacks, but I can always fake blacks later. I can take this blue blouse and dye it black, and you'll never notice that. I cannot take a white blouse or this blue blouse and bleach it white without you being able to tell that. I can't fake the whites, but I can fake the darks. So if the histogram doesn't go all the way to the left side, I can correct that later on in Lightroom or Photoshop. And I have a class coming up on that if you all want to do that one. What you don't want to do is you do not want the histogram to spike up against the far right side, the y-axis, because what goes up the y-axis are your whitest whites with no details. Does anybody see your picture blinking at you?
Yes.
Yeah. And Nikon, it's on a different screen than your histogram is. You have to go one more info button or display button, and then you'll see your blinks. Everybody see your blinks on your pictures, or you've seen those before? Yes, shake your head up and down.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. The blinks are important because this is where you blew it. This is where you've overexposed and there is no detail there. If you print the picture, wherever it's blinking, no ink will hit the paper. It's totally blank. There is nothing there. So let me show you how I used my histogram to get this photograph of the cat on the couch. So cat's asleep on the couch in this old bookstore. The sun is coming through the left-hand side at the corner window. I want the sun to come through the window. I want it to be pure white up in that corner. So I turn the camera vertical, point the camera at the scene, focus on the cat because that's my subject, dial in my f-stop, dial in my shutter speed, click the picture, check it on the back of the camera, and I get this top histogram right here. All of this area that's running up this top, this y-axis over here on the right-hand side, it's all blinking at me. So the corner's blinking, the floor is blinking, the couch is blinking, and the cat is blinking in the first photograph, meaning all that stuff is overexposed. And all I wanted to overexpose was the top corner of the window. So I took the picture a second time. And instead of putting the light meter in the middle, I put it one notch toward the negative. -1 for Sarah and Renee. And I took the picture again and then checked the histogram. And in that picture, the floor's not blinking, the couch is not blinking, but the white cat is blinking right here. They're in that fur. There's no detail in the fur. So I took the picture a second time, turned the camera vertical. Instead of putting the light meter in the middle, I put it 2 stops negative. And in your mirrorless cameras, you'll see this through the viewfinder. Everybody else, you have to do this checking it on the histogram. Focused on the cat, took the picture a third time. Check that on the back of the camera. The highlight indicator is blinking for me up at the top of the picture, but the floor is okay, the couch is okay, and now the cat's not blinking at me anymore. So sometimes if light is very bright in the frame, you need to take a test shot, check your histogram, and then underexpose or overexpose. If you're using mirrorless, you might be able to see your histogram right through the viewfinder, and then you can underexpose or overexpose right through the viewfinder without having to do the test. If you're not using mirrorless, then you're going to have to get yourself used to checking that picture to make sure that your highlights aren't blinking or your histogram's not spiked up the right. Make sense?
Kinda.
Kinda? Okay, good, good. You're holding on, right? Okay. I just want you to be holding on right now. Okay. Kind of. Everybody else okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I've dumped a lot at you. Okay. You've got homework before I see you next class. So on your handout, you have your homework assignment. And what you're going to do is you are going to photograph a stationary object. It's going to be bright sunshiny outside. So do this in a shaded area as opposed to in bright sunlight. Or if you want, you can do it in your house if you don't want to go outside and sweat in 100 degrees. But you want the object that you photograph to be 8 or 10 feet away from the background. And you want to focus as close as you can. So you want to get as close as you can to the object. So it can be a figurine, it can be, you know, a vase, whatever you want to do. And then you're going to run through the f-stops and you're going to rebalance your light meter every single time. Make any notes. You see on the handout, I gave you a place for your notes. If you do it right, your pictures all the way through will look exactly the same. They'll have the same light. But what will happen is you'll see your background come more and more in focus as you get toward your F22. Your second one is you're going to photograph a water hose or a dripping water if you've got a fountain in your backyard, or if there's a fountain nearby, or you know there's a fountain in the lake in front of your subdivision. You can do that. You want to go to, you know, someplace around where we have fountains or something like that, feel free to do that. You're going to put the camera on the tripod. You're going to start with a 2/50th of a second. And then you're going to gradually move to 1/25th, 60, 30, all the way down. Make sure that your ISO is 100 for everybody except Nikon. Nikon, make sure your ISO is just 200. And then you're going to write down what your f-stop was. And you're going to, if you did it right, your pictures the light will be the same, but what will change is how much of the water we stop and how much of the water we don't stop. Don't use a fine garden sprayer. it doesn't show really well. So, go ahead and just put the hose dripping into something that shows really well. Okay. In your, I'm going to send you a link to my Dropbox, and you can upload your photographs to my Dropbox. I'll check them, and then I'll bring them into the class and show them to everybody, and we'll talk about them as part of your homework assignment. If you have Dropbox or WeTransfer or Hightail or one of those type of transfer services, feel free to upload your pictures there, and send me a link and I'll download from there. But have your pictures ready, if you would, to me by the middle of the day next Monday, and then I can take them and move them into the slideshow. Okay. If you run into problems along the way, then please feel free to email me. And when this recording is finished, I will send it to you along with a link to my Dropbox and a link to next week's class. Questions before I leave you?
What shutter speed do we have to use a tripod?
The rule of thumb is the millimeters of your lens equals your shutter speed. So if you've got your lens zoomed to 24, then you need at least a 1/24th.
Okay.
If the lens zooms to 105, then you need at least a 105th. 105. That's the roughly. On the stationary object and the waterfall, make sure you keep the camera stable. Either put it on a tripod or put it on a stool. And if you don't own a tripod and you want to buy one in between now and next week, email me and I'll tell you the one that I recommend, because it's in next week's handout. Okay. Or I think it's on your handout, if I'm not mistaken, for next week. Let me see. Tripods, camera operations. No, it's not. Oh yeah, it is. MePhoto Globetrotter for sharp images. So if you're shopping for a tripod or you want to order one from Amazon and have it delivered, I love Amazon. Then it is the MePhoto Globetrotter Classic Carbon Fiber. Don't buy the one that's not classic. Buy the classic carbon fiber. It'll cost about $319. Best tripod you've ever had.
Could you say that again, please?
It's the MePhoto Globetrotter Classic Carbon Fiber Tripod. And it's on your handout, but I just wrote MePhoto Globetrotter because they've now come out with a new one, but you want the classic carbon fiber. Greatest tripod ever made. Okay, any questions? Thank you all very much. You've been great. I've enjoyed having you. I'll share the recording with you all and I will see you next week. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye. See you next time.
Bye.